Actually, I think can hold me. What? It can't. Hello. Hi. Not in the ears, please. I thought while I get my first round of broad beans started, I would just sit down and maybe have a little chat about, what are you doing? It's not treats. Get lost. Go on. Yeah, I thought I would just have a quick chat about what I've learnt this year in the garden. I think I'm going to do a separate video on the sort of whole lifestyle thing, because we moved from the city to as rural as the UK can really get. There's been lots of changes on that front. You know, we've had to learn to live a different way. So I think that's a whole video in itself. But this video, I'm just talking about the garden. So what am I doing here? I'm just starting one tray. There's a worm. I'll go back to the land. Hey, good Bob. Yeah, I'm just starting a tray of broad beans here. I've never overwintered them before. I don't know why I didn't last year. I started them in spring, but anywho, I thought I would give it a go this year. Just a tray. I don't go too crazy with broad beans, just because I think for the size of the plant and the amount of work that goes into sort of shelling them and preparing them, they're not the best use of my space and time. I like eating them, I enjoy them when they're in season, but I never really find myself being sad when they are done. So I just do enough to kind of enjoy seasonally, but I'm not really going to do it. I'm not going to think about doing enough to preserve up or anything this year, I don't think. I may start some more in spring. I'll see how these do. But anyway, back to this year of gardening. I have learned a lot from 2023. I think I came into this year with both no expectations and very high expectations all at the same time. Now obviously this is all new to me here. We just moved here in June of 2022, so we kind of missed the majority of the growing season that year, and the land needed loads of work, so I didn't do an overwintered garden last winter because we were just getting to grips with the land and things like that. So this spring and summer is my first experience of growing here. Before we moved here, I lived in the inner city. I had a patio garden with some pots, some planters, but that was it. So from moving there to here on 3 acres and trying to grow all my own veg is quite a leap. So I knew that that was going to be a leap, and that, you know, I wasn't just going to be able to rock up here and do everything I wanted to do. So I did know that, but at the same time I wanted to try as many things as I possibly could, because what better way to learn than to just have a go? You know, worst case scenario, none of it came off. I mean, that's not likely. Even, you know, if you have no idea what you're doing, if you go out there and you start, you know, 20 different kinds of veg and you stick them in the ground, chances are something's going to come off. But, you know, I wasn't brand new to gardening, but I also just didn't really have the time or the resources to go ahead and try and do everything perfectly. So I kind of just wanted to try as many things as I could without really going above and beyond for anything in particular, just to get a good insight into how it would work here. I've learnt loads of things, but it's highlighted some very specific things I thought I would chat to you about today. So here are my biggest takeaways from the garden in my first year of growing here on our small holding. But I'm going to go and find somewhere more comfortable to sit, because this is my first point. Having somewhere to sit in the garden is so important. So why am I planting seeds sat on my arse on the cold tarmac of our yard? Because I don't actually have anywhere to sit out here. I mean, I could sit in my potting shed, but when, especially this time of year, everything's drawing to a close, and at the start in spring and the sun's out, it might be a bit chilly, but you still just want to be outside. I don't really have anywhere to sit outside, like in the gardens. So I end up literally just coming out, doing the jobs that need doing, and then going back inside. Like, the only reason to come out to my garden is to work in my garden. Whereas my old garden, I used, you know, because it was just our garden, that was it, and there were just pots everywhere around the place where we'd also have a barbecues and, you know, sit out with our friends and stuff. You know, you were constantly around it all every time you were out in the garden. Whereas we have our garden up by the house where we, you know, put the laundry out and sit for a barbie, but that's not around here, so I don't see it. It's not in front of me. I have to come out to do the gardening, which I have done, but I can see that I would spend so much more time out here just doing the little things, keeping it clean and tidy, if I just had had a space out here to just sit and enjoy. You know, if there was a place to stop, like I bring a cup of tea out here all the time and I end up leaving it on a fence post somewhere and it just goes cold, because then I start doing stuff and then I go inside and forget about it, or I get carried away with something. You know, there's no place to sit and have a cuppa and just take it in. So I think that is the biggest thing that I want to implement from this year to next year, is just to put a nice chair, maybe a little table out here directly in the garden. The next thing I've thought long and hard about this year is my grass pathways between my beds out here, because all my beds are in ground, because ultimately I found that to be the easiest and cheapest way to just get started. You know, this was just a big open field, so trying to just take a field and turn it into, you know, a prolific veggie growing garden, I just needed to get going, and in-ground no dig beds were the way to do that for me. I know some of you did warn me against keeping the grass out here in between the beds, so in the walkways, which I totally understand. And so do I regret keeping the grass? Yes and no. I love it. I actually love having the grass out here, especially when like people come and we walk through the gardens. And this year my in-laws came and we were just walking through the gardens, shoes off, you know, just moseying around. I thought that was just so lovely. Like, there's something just so beautiful about, you know, we live somewhere so green, and I love embracing that by keeping the grass. Is it extra work for the upkeep? Yeah, it is. And is it potentially to a detriment of whatever's in the beds next to them? Yes, if I let it get out of hand, which I did on occasion this year. I think mostly I kept up with it okay, but there's a big proviso on it, and it was basically anywhere where I could get the ride-on mower was fine. I was okay doing the general mowing in this region, but some of my beds were too narrow to do that, and I thought, oh, that's okay, I'll come out with the strimmer, the hand shears and do it. But realistically, I didn't do that anywhere near as often as I would have needed to, and those bits got a little bit out of control. As soon as the grass gets out of control, it starts spilling into the beds, and then you end up losing that sort of border on your beds. And when you think about how much effort it would actually be, this, you know, this growing space is maybe what, a quarter of an acre that I'm gonna, you know, ultimately once I fill this space I'll be working with, and that's a lot of grass to get rid of. So I think actually the effort it would take to get rid of the grass here might just be insane. So I think my plan is to keep this grass, but as you may be able to see with the new garlic bed, I've moved them around a little bit to make sure all the spaces in between are big enough to get the mower in, and not just the spaces but the angles and things, because, you know, it can't turn a right angle. You still have to come along and do the sort of edge bits, because it's not perfect, but, you know, not to leave any walkways between the beds unmowed, because that is just asking for trouble. But I am going to keep the green because it brings me joy. Another quick thought on the in-ground beds. Would I love for some of these to be raised beds? Yes, absolutely. But one of the big reasons for not doing that first time around was that I didn't know if I'd want to change things. So I'm glad that I made that choice, because now I am moving things around because the layout doesn't really work. It depends how things go over the winter as to whether or not we'll put a few raised beds in this year. You know, it does cost money and it is effort and time. So I don't think we're ever going to do like one giant, huge, make everything in a raised bed out here, because that's just, you know, going to end up being too expensive. But I think hopefully we'll add sort of a couple more every year once I get used to things. Once I'm happy with the sort of arrangement of an area of beds, maybe do those ones, see how it goes. But I always keep some in ground space because it's just so easy. And then obviously I don't have to fill it with anything either. So the soil here has been good. You know, the areas where I've done no dig and a relatively small layer, like a couple of inches worth of compost on top, I've still had great harvest from. So I don't want to have to fill up, you know, loads and loads of raised beds just for the sake of it. But I might put a few in here and there and make things a little bit more permanent out here. So another huge learning point for me this year has been just learning my conditions. I'm quite glad I didn't start in that first summer and try to put in a winter garden, because, you know, I've moved 300 and something miles from where I came from. It's a completely different climate here. Things just behave so much differently. It's not just temperature, it's everything else. We're really coastal, surrounded by water, we get such high winds, all these things that there's no way I could have planned for without taking the time to just watch it. So we had that whole winter to just see sort of how bad it gets here, you know, where the water is going to sit in a field like this. So before we put this garden in that first winter, we were getting some puddles and things where it wasn't draining properly. So then, because I hadn't done anything yet, we had to basically dig a path and put in a French drain in this field to make sure that we didn't sort of get puddles of standing water, you know, in random patches throughout this field. So knowing that and having that time to watch gave us the opportunity to fix that before it would have been a problem. If I tried to plant something in there, then it would have been a pain in the ass to then have to go back, take everything up and do some work like that. But then that being said, this was our first spring here, so I had all the things to learn there as well. I think I was too hesitant on putting things out because we're so much further north than I was before. I think that it's going to be colder and that I had to wait to put things out because people at my equivalent level of north in the UK cannot get away with as much as I can here, I think because we are just so coastal. So while it doesn't get hot here, it really wasn't cold in the spring. I mean, it's not warm, but it's just consistent. It doesn't drop in those evenings. But that being said, we don't get a lot of sun in the summer, so we need a much longer season than folk down south who get, the longer glorious sunny days. We get less sun than you. So I think I need to get things out earlier, trust that it's going to be mild. I need to get things started a bit earlier so I have a bit longer for things to really properly mature in the season, because it's not cold now. We're not anywhere near a frost, but the days are drawing in, we're running out of light, so that's still limiting what you can do at this time of year. So I think all of this is just like, you just have to live here and grow in a place for at least a year before you can even start thinking like long term what works. I think wind was probably one of the biggest things that I had to contend with that I wasn't really ready for. Where we came from, it was a very protected area in terms of wind. We didn't really get any extremes of weather like that, whereas out here we're a lot more exposed, and you have to consider that there are lots of things that I went for sort of like the big versions of. I didn't do dwarf plants because look, I've got all of this space, I can grow anything I want. I'm not limited by growing space, but dwarf things tend to be quite compact, which a lot of the time means they're closer to the ground, which means it's much easier for me to protect them from the wind than some big giant version. As you can see from my arches behind me, they were an absolute bust because the beans I was growing French climbing beans up them, and they did okay up to sort of waist high, but then as soon as they start getting up here, I think they just catch the wind over that hedgerow behind because the prevailing wind comes across here. And then they really, really struggled. So actually my dwarf beans did so much better than my climbing beans, and it's not a matter of in-ground space, it's a matter of the conditions that they're growing in. I have so much more insight into how things are going to work here. So I think that's quite exciting for making plans for next year. I think what I need then is to keep things close to the ground, and I need more windbreaks out here. So I think the same goes for like what things to specifically grow. If you sort of try and look up what should I grow, how much of this and that to feed myself for the year, people will say grow what you like, which yes is good advice. There's no point growing stuff you don't want, but at the same time, grow what's going to grow well. And I think that's one of the things I'll talk about when I do the sort of lifestyle change and the things we've learned in that year, is that sometimes you've got to change your habits if you want to feed yourself off the land. We're used to a world where we can just import anything we want whenever we want, but as soon as you start growing it, you realise that's not how it works. So we ate loads of like tomato based products. So in my head I'm like, I'm going to grow hundreds of tomato plants and then I won't have to buy any tomato products all year round. Great idea, great use of my space, except for the fact that I live in North Wales where it's really wet and windy and rainy, which is not good conditions for growing tomatoes. So basically I ended up wasting a load of this space. It's not that we didn't get tomatoes off them, but the yield was pretty bad. I probably got as many tomatoes as I did out of my tiny garden, in pots, because that was the perfect condition down south. I was in a completely protected little walled sunny garden. It was a little sun trap, it was ideal conditions as far as tomatoes in the UK goes. Whereas here, it was just so wet, there was no way to keep them out of it. So we got blight really early, loads of disease, and anything that didn't get blight was just the torrents of rain inconsistently just meant that everything that was on the plant just ended up splitting. It really wasn't a great tomato year, which I think, I'm not saying I won't grow tomatoes again, but I think there is no point in me giving up like half of my garden space for something that it's not ideal conditions for. If you see behind me, I've got celery for years and years and years. Apparently that loves North Wales. The spinach and the lettuces and things I found really difficult down south because they just bolted immediately. Have done great here. The brassicas have done great, the beans have done great. It's just growing things that suit your conditions. There are loads of things I can do for myself here, so better to focus on those things rather than regret the stuff that I can't do. and then be sad about it. So all in all, I am actually, I know this has been a big old chat about everything that went wrong, but I am so happy with how it's gone this year. I have absolutely loved every second of living here. At the end of the day, I'm inexperienced, so I'm going to make mistakes and things aren't going to go as well as I hope. But every time that happens, that just means I'm more likely to do better next time. So I feel like I have learnt loads. We have eaten loads and loads of food out of this garden, so it's not like everything was a flop. It was just some good lessons to learn. I think the last takeaway, the last big thing that I would want to change for next year is to be more organised. Now, I don't begrudge myself for not being organised this year, because it was very much a just try everything, throw everything in and see what works and see what doesn't. And that was on purpose, you know. I didn't know what would work, what wouldn't, and rather than try and be an expert at everything straight away, that was just never going to happen. So this way I got to try loads of things and see what worked and see what didn't. But next year, having spent my year information gathering this year, I am definitely going to need to be more organised. Because while we've eaten loads of veg out of here this year, I think, we have still bought some. We haven't, and it's been kind of as and when it's ready, as and when I could get it kind of thing. Whereas with a bit more planning, I think I really can provide our veg for most of the year, and we shouldn't have to buy stuff. I just need to be a little bit more organised, because we kind of went in peaks and troughs. I think this year I found it quite hard to sort of preserve things. While we had huge gluts of things, sometimes it wasn't by design. It was just when things happened to be ready, and a lot of the time it was kind of just a bit extra here and there, which kind of makes it hard to do anything with. We ended up just eating more of that thing at that time, which is not a problem, but I am hoping to do some preserving and to keep stuff in the freezer, canned up on the shelves, and things like that. So in order to do that, I think I need to be a bit more organised and plan for when that's going to be. Nothing got wasted because we had chickens, but I think we could have wasted some food and it wasn't necessarily used to its full potential. I think what I'll probably try to do is sort of grow our seasonal things that we're going to just eat fresh out of the garden with no view to preserving, and then have sort of a separate plan for the things I would like to preserve. So we did a lot of corn. Sweet corn went really well. I did have the time, because it was a bit later in the season, I had the time to spend a couple of days just getting it all done, harvesting, putting it up, and that felt really good. I think this next year I will plan to do the same with everything else that we'd like to store a bit of for over the winter. I'll plant those in bulk at a time so that they become ready at the same time, and I can actually preserve up enough to make it worth it, rather than just dribs and drabs of extras that we don't quite get around to eating. Whew, sorry, that was loads of chit chat. I hope it's helpful to hear sort of insight from first year proper gardener trying to feed themselves all year round. I think great first year, lots to learn, but lots of progress to be made. So thank you for joining me this year, and hopefully you'll join me for the next one, and I will keep you up to date. Cheers, guys.